Hi folks, hope you're okay. I'm sorry for the flashing information here. Sorry about this. Okay, I think it would be a bit better if we switch it to okay, we're on. I'm doing this video on an article called "The Bible So Misunderstood It's a Sin." Kurt Eichenwald, December the 23rd, 2014. Basically, on the Reformed Baptist Daily, we read Newsweek's recent article on the Bible so misunderstood it's a sin has garnered a lot of attention both on the web and the media. It has especially grabbed the attention of some leading evangelical and apologists. So James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries has refuted this video, and we will put him on in a minute. So before we do that, let's have a look at the article. Here's the article, "The Bible So Misunderstood It's a Sin." Okay, so this is the article. So it says, they wave their Bibles at passers-by, screaming their condemnation of homosexuals. They fall on their knees, worshipping at the base of granite monuments up to the 10 Commandments while demanding prayer in school. They appeal to God to save America from their political opponents, mostly Democrats. They gather in football stadiums by the thousands to pray for the country's salvation. They are God's frauds, cafeteria Christians who pick and choose which Bible verses they heed, with less care than the exercise in selecting side orders for lunch. They are joined by religious rationalizers, fundamentalists who, unable to find scripture supporting their bias and beliefs, twist phrases and modify translations to prove they are honoring the Bible's words. So this is quite clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, propaganda. This isn't really a scholar of any great depth at all. It's just a guy with a passion to bash American fundamentalists. He goes on to say that the American fundamentalists don't know their Bible, and he gives so-called statistics, but statistics can be twisted either way. Then he goes on to make the claim that the Bible is not what Christians actually follow. He says, no television preacher has ever read the Bible. Again, a silly comment. Neither has any evangelical politician. Again, a silly comment. Neither has a pope. Neither have I. And neither have you. At best, we've all read a bad translation, a translation of translations of translations, a hand of copies of copies of copies of copies, and on, hundreds of times. If this is serious scholarship, I don't know how anybody can take this seriously, which I'll go into in a minute. He goes, about 400 years passed between the writing of the first Christian manuscripts and their compilation into the New Testament. That's an exaggeration. That's the same amount of time between the arrival of the Pilgrims on the Mayflower and today. The first books of the Old Testament were written 1,000 years before that. In other words, some 1,500 years passed between the day. The first books of the Old Testament were written 1,000 years before that. In other words, some 1,500 years passed between the day the first biblical author put stick to clay and when the books that would become the New Testament were chosen. There were no printing presses beforehand or until 1,000 years later. There were no vacuum-sealed technologies to preserve paper for centuries. Dried clay broke papyrus and parchment crumbled away. Primitive inks faded. The problem with that is it implies that information in antiquity could not be preserved. That's a bogus claim. So we'll see how he tries to substantiate it. Back then, writing from one era could be passed to the next only by copying them by hand, yes, and oral tradition. But go on. While there were professional scribes whose lives were dedicated to this grueling work, they did not start copying the letters and testaments about Jesus' time until centuries after they were written. That is a complete fabrication. That's not true. I've made many videos on the Gospels, for example, and it's very clear that there was copying going on in the 1st century because of the widespread use of the Gospels. Rubbish dumps in Egypt have been found with ancient manuscripts going back to the 1st century, even Gnostic texts, so this is just complete bogus. This is obviously not a professional scholar. He goes on, these manuscripts was originally written in Koine or Common Greek, and not all of the amateur copyists spoke the language or were even fully literate. That's an assumption. Some copied the scripts without understanding the words, an assumption, and Koine was written in what is known as scripture continua, meaning no spaces between words and no punctuation. So sentences like "we should go to mum" could be interpreted as "we should go eat mum" or "we should go eat mum." Sentences can have different meanings depending on where the spaces are placed. For example, "God is nowhere" could be "God is not now here" or "God is nowhere." None of this mattered for centuries because Christians were certain God had guided the hand not only of the original writers but also of all those copyists. The thing is about these, when he talks about we should go eat mum, we should, etc. For example, pronunciations of those words were preserved. If you go back to the Old Testament, for example, there are a number of different sources to the Old Testament. You have the Septuagint, you have the Masorati, you have the Sumerian, you have the the Samaritan text. So the pronunciation of the words are preserved within the conglomerate of these so many different texts. He goes on, none of this matters for centuries because Christians were certain God had guided the hand not only of the original writers but also of all those copyists. But in the past 100 years or so, tens of thousands of manuscripts of the New Testament have been discovered dating back centuries, and what biblical scholars now know is that later versions of the book differ significantly from early ones. In fact, even copies from the same time periods differ from each other. There are more variations among our manuscripts than there are words in New Testament, says Dr. Bart Ehrman, groundbreaking biblical scholar and professor at the University of North Carolina, who has written many books on the New Testament. Now, this argument that he makes, the way he makes it is a typical Bart Ehrman argument, and Bart Ehrman is exaggerating what he's saying. Yes, there are many variants, but in those variants, they are of minor detail. And so that makes it quite remarkable that we have such minor differences within the variations for so many texts that it completely flips it around and makes it a strong argument rather than a weak argument. And he argues from authority here. He says, so Dr. Bart Ehrman, a groundbreaking biblical scholar. A groundbreaking biblical scholar to who? To a certain group section of scholars. Most of the discrepancies are little more than the handwritten equivalent of a typo, but that error was then included by future scribes. There were also minor changes made by literate scribes centuries after the manuscripts were written because of what they decided were flaws in the accounts they were recopying. Listen, yes, there are minor differences which you have acknowledged, but you say, but that error was then included by future scribes. That's why we have different families of manuscripts. That's why we can do textual criticism to discern those mistakes. So he's just being completely dishonest about the work of textual criticism. He goes, there were also minor changes made by literate scribes centuries after the manuscripts were written. But again, he misses the point that there were so many different families of manuscripts that we can detect those issues. For example, an early version of Luke 3:16 in the New Testament said, John answered, saying to all of them, the problem was that no one had asked John anything. So a 5th century scribe fixed that by changing the words to John, knowing that they were thinking what they were thinking said. So let's just see. Just get every day, just doing a bit of textual criticism, folks. Okay. Someone's just calling here. See who's calling me. It's Veckel. So, looking at textual criticism, there are manuscripts, Greek manuscripts with John in. All right, in verse 16. Okay, so he's incorrect. The problem was that no one had asked John anything. So 5th century scribes fixed that by changing the words to John. Well, you know, go and look at Greek manuscripts. There are some with John in. He goes, but this discussion is about something much more important than whether some scribe in the Middle Ages decided God had not been paying attention while guiding the hand of Luke. Indeed, there are significant differences in copies that touch on far more profound issues. Scribes added whole sections of New Testament and removed words and sentences that contradict emerging Orthodox beliefs. Okay, let's see. Let's see now. He's made this claim. Let's read the claim. Indeed, there are significant differences in copies, that touch on far more profound issues. Scribes added whole sections of New Testament and removed words and sentences that contradict emerging Orthodox beliefs. Now notice what he's doing here as a textual critic. He's giving you a theory of the history of textual criticism here. It's not actually grounded in data. This is very important. Listen, indeed, there are significant differences in copies that touch on a far more profound issue. What is it? Scribes, this is his theory, scribes added whole sections of the New Testament and removed words and sentences that contradicting emerging Orthodox beliefs. Now that is a theory of the history of textual criticism. It's a theory of history. Now it says, take one of the most famous tales of the New Testament, which starts in John 7:53. A group of Pharisees and others bring a woman caught committing adultery to Jesus. Under Mosaic law, the laws of Moses handed down in the Old Testament, she must be stoned. The Pharisees asked Jesus whether the woman should be released or killed, hoping to force him to choose between honoring Mosaic law and teaching. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast the stone. The group leaves, and Jesus tells the woman to sin no more. It's a powerful story, known even by those with a just passing knowledge of the Bible. It was depicted in Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ. It's often used to point out the hypocrisy of Christians who denounce that they perceive to be the sins of others. Unfortunately, John didn't write it. Scribes made it up sometime in the Middle Ages. Now, this is a complete fabrication. It's not true. Actually, it's mentioned by, this passage is actually mentioned by St. Augustine in the 4th century. End of argument, Mr. Scholar. Go and check it out. J.C. Ryle's commentary on the Gospel of John, when he talks about the text. And if you actually go and read Sir Thomas Aquinas on John, he gives quotations which go far back, way before the Middle Ages, of different writers who quote the Gospel of John on that text. He goes, it does not appear in any of the 3 other Gospels or any of the early Greek manuscripts of John, but it does appear in some quotations of the early church fathers, or partly. That's my parenthesis. Even if the Gospel of John is an infallible telling of the history of Jesus' ministry, the event simply never happened. I've given you strong evidence that. Okay, so, and then here's another one. For Pentecostal Christians, an important section of the Bible appears in the Gospel of Mark 16, 17, 18. These verses say that those who believe in Jesus will speak in tongues and have extraordinary power, such as the ability to cast out demons. But once again, the verse came from a creative scribe long after the Gospel of Mark was written. In fact, the earliest versions of Mark stop at 6:8. It's an awkward ending with 3 women who have gone to the tomb where Jesus was laid after the crucifixion. He goes, in the early copies of the original writings, that is, the 12 verses that follow in modern Bibles, Jesus appearing to Mary Magdalene and the disciples and then to heaven are not there. A significant moment that would be hard to forget, one would think. The same is true for other critical portions of the Bible, such as John 5:7. This argument that he's making in Mark 16, 17, 18 is completely refuted by looking at the early church fathers. And the early church fathers clearly quoted this text, which shows you that this was in the early manuscripts. Now, because there are manuscripts, the early manuscripts that we do have of Mark, the earliest, don't have this in, the argument is then it wasn't in the original. But it's important to know that the early church fathers, which go back earlier than our earliest manuscripts, quote the text of this passage of Mark, which proves conclusively that it was part of the manuscript of Mark. What could have happened is a lot of these passages were burnt. A lot of persecution was going on, and a damaged copy could have been copied and copied and copied. That's what could have happened. But to say that it wasn't in the original is not telling you the full story of the scholarship there. Okay. Then comes the problem of accurate translation. Many words in New Testament Greek don't have clear English equivalents. Sentence structure, idioms, stylistic differences, all these are challenged when converting versions of New Testament books into English, and this can't be solved with Burleigh's course. Koine Greek is ancient Greek and not spoken anymore. This is why English translations differ, with many having been revised to reflect the view and guesses of modern translators. This is an argument from language. If we took this argument, then we couldn't understand what he was saying if this was translated into French. So basically, this could only be understood if we read it in English. So his own argument negates itself. And then his sociopath emperor. Why would God, in conveying his message to the world, speak in whispers and riddles? It seems nonsensical, but the belief that he refused to convey a clear message has led to the slaughter of many thousands of Christians by Christians. In fact, Christians are believed to have massacred more followers of Jesus than any other group or nation. I mean, this is just gross fabrication and attack on Christianity without any foundation whatsoever. More people died under atheist regimes than anything. Atheists massacred more Christians than Christians. And were they really Christians? Because Christ said you should love your neighbor as yourself. Indeed, for hundreds of years of the death of Jesus, groups adopted radically conflicting writings about the details of his life and the meaning of his ministry and murdered those who disagreed. For many centuries, Christianity was first a battle of books and then a battle of blood. There was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Simon Peter, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Barnabas, one sect of Christianity, the Gnostics. Interesting, if you read the Gnostic Gospels and compare them with the four Gospels, you will find that the four Gospels know the historical, archaeological places of Jerusalem quite well. The Gnostic Gospels don't know the archaeological places of Jerusalem well at all, which shows you that they were not written in the 1st century. They were written at a later time by people who didn't know what they were talking about. I've made many videos on this. Well, this is supposed to be, let's see who this is. So this is a writer really who, excuse me, who really sorry about this. Just okay, so that's a writer. That's the writer. Sorry about this. So we're going to see what, I don't agree all the time with this guy, because he will go soft on the last ending of Mark, so he's not, I don't rate James White as a good textual critic, because I would defend the last ending of Mark. So anyhow, but he does have some interesting things to say. Let's see what he says.
And greetings, welcome to the Dividing Line on a Tuesday afternoon, the only Dividing Line for this week. It is Christmas week 2014, and Thursday is Christmas Day, and so no, we don't like doing the webcast when there's absolutely positively no one watching or listening. So, well, there probably would be. There might be a dozen people who, if we did something on Thursday, would actually listen, and that's frightening to me. It's very frightening that anyone would actually do that. Probably a jumbo edition of the program today. That'll make up a little bit for the fact that we are a little bit short on Dividing Line time this week, and I was going to do some basic stuff. I was going to talk a little about Christmas. We're still going to do that, basically because it appeared in the article. But this morning, and I was going to go back and look, but I ended up investing so much time in a tweet fest conversation with the author of the cover article for Newsweek magazine that I just didn't have time to go back and look at it. And that's a shame. But Kurt Eichenwald and I had an extensive discussion, which, if you're interested, you can go to Dr. Oakley 1689 on Twitter and follow the conversation that took place there. It ended suddenly 33 minutes ago without any announcement that it was ending, but that's okay. It is available there if you want to take a look at it. The article is entitled, "The Bible So Misunderstood It's a Sin." Now, let me just tell you before I launch into this, at some point in the next few minutes, my co-host is going to finally arrive here at the office, and we're going to come to a screeching halt for just a few moments so that the co-host can make a few comments, and then we will go back directly to the review of the article. So I'm just going to let you know ahead of time that there's going to be, we're not going to take a break. It's going to be, right here as part of the program. But just letting you know that will take place eventually, and that is the plan. Anyway, there's nothing surprising to me whatsoever that Newsweek, the week of Christmas, would post yet another bald-faced attack upon the Christian faith. There's nothing new about this. This is what the mainstream media has been about for decades, and there's certainly nothing new. Well, I guess there is something new. The level of error in this particular article is shocking. I guess 30 years ago, there might have been editors that would have caught some of the incredible errors, talking about how at the Council of Constantinople, Jesus became Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I mean, oh yeah, stuff on a level that makes anyone who knows anything about church history just go, really? Maybe 30 years ago, there might have been editors that would catch that. It just, anymore, as long as it's negative toward the Christian faith, toward belief in the Bible, toward evangelicalism as a whole, whatever that is anymore, it will end up in print. Or does Newsweek even? I don't even think Newsweek does print anymore. I think it's just all online. So, and someone actually said on Twitter that by doing this, I was actually doubling Newsweek's readership this week. You're gonna have to make sure they can get in when they arrive here. So, just so you know. Anyway, and that may be the case. But the primary reason I'm responding to this is not because there's anything new in it. It is basically a really bad and badly understood repetition of Bart Ehrman without actually understanding Bart Ehrman. Okay, so we've done the Bart Ehrman stuff. We have played entire presentations by Bart Ehrman, and we've gone into the Greek text, and we've done all this kind of stuff. But that's just what we're going to be looking at in this particular article. But the reason to look at it is to document the fundamental bigotry and bias of the mainstream media. Now, with that said, my co-host has arrived, and would she like to just walk in, maybe? Come here, Klemsky Doodles. Come here. Hi. Hey there. Oh, hello. Well, see these cameras right here? There are people that are looking at us right now, and they're watching us all over the place. Yeah, see, there's a camera right there. See? And they're looking at us. And see, we're up there on the screen. See up there on the screen? See, Grandpa? Yeah. Say, hello, world. Can you say, hello, world? Can you? Very good. Hello, world. So you're my co-host right now. Can you say co-host? Okay, that's close. And this is called the dividing line. Is that Dad? Oh, shoes off. Oh, I forgot. Clementine has an aversion to wearing shoes indoors, which is pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And that's Dad, yeah? And you don't know him. His name is Rich. Can you say, hi, Rich? Hi, Rich. And, of course, I'm going to tell everybody, this is my granddaughter, Clementine. That's right. Clementine, that's right. And she lives in Georgia. In Georgia, right? Yeah. And where's my hair supposed to be? Yeah. But it's not there, is it? Variation. When that was one of the first things that's talked about in patristic sources, you have such things as a diatessaron, you have the hexapla, you have the discussions of textual variations in the 3rd century. When it goes all the way back to then, and is well known by any biblically literate person to this day, and we deal with these things and we talk about these things, then you're going to be held to the standard, a scholarly standard, and ask, why would you say these things? Why would you make these statements? Why would you say at the Council of Constantinople, Jesus became Father, Son, Holy Spirit, when no one would ever say that? You cannot provide a single source that would even come close to saying that. That's a gross misunderstanding. You've not read anything from the Council of Constantinople, Mr. Eichenwald, and you know it. You know you've not read anything. You're reading secondary sources. It's just a fact. Anyway, is a review of the Bible's history and a recounting of its words, then you better be accurate. It is only through accepting where the Bible comes from and who put it together that anyone can comprehend what history's most important book says, and just as important, what it does not say. Well, I agree with that. The problem is that the facts you give are not the facts of history, and you don't seem to know the other side. You're giving a very biased perspective. He says, no television preacher has ever read the Bible. Neither has any evangelical politician. Neither has the Pope, neither have I, and neither have you. At best, we've all read a bad translation, a translation of translations of translations of hand-copied copies of copies of copies of copies, and on hundreds of times. There is a gross misunderstanding of Bart Ehrman. Here is a man who does not understand the difference between translation and transmission, because there are many men, other than myself, who have read the Bible in Greek, read the Bible in Hebrew, preached from the Bible in Greek, preached from the Bible in Hebrew, and we can examine the critical texts, the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia. We can examine the Nestle-Aland 28th edition. We can look at the UBS, now 5th edition. We can look at Textus Receptus if you want to. We have them all right there. I've got them right here on the screen. We're going to be looking at one of the textual variants that you massacred in your conversation a little bit later on. That is a clear indication that you do not understand the difference between translation and transmission. Evidently, you don't believe that we can obtain the original readings. I would abjure you, sir. Listen to my debate with Bart Ehrman and listen to the questions that I asked him and listen what I asked him to show us where he thinks we do not contain in any Greek manuscript the original readings of the New Testament. And he gave us one example, a conjectural emendation. One example. If you'll really listen to Ehrman, you'll discover that what he says is we're just tinkering with the text. We're just tinkering with it. Mr. Eichenwald, I teach regularly. I just got back from teaching in Kiev and Berlin on justification of the Trinity. I've taught textual criticism in Berlin. I would not accept your article as a paper in an undergraduate freshman class. I would fail it immediately and ask you to rewrite it. It's that bad. Not only do you just simply throw out stuff, and you're about to cite Jason David DeBoon from up in Northern Arizona University, you do realize that there are all sorts of people on the other side. He is way out there, way out there. So you'll throw a few names out. You show no interest in handling them accurately, or in showing and knowing anything about responses to these perspectives. And of course, the errors. Then comes the problem of accurate translation. Many words in New Testament Greek don't have clear English equivalents. Sentence structure, idioms, stylistic differences, all of these are challenges when converting versions of New Testament books into English. Not nearly as bad as you think it is. Not nearly as bad. We can read Greek quite well. And while we can sit around and argue, one that I was listening to just recently on a ride I was doing yesterday, we have to argue with N.T. Wright over what is found in Romans 4:1. In Romans 4:1, tiun erumen, and when you look at erumen, therefore what shall we say Abraham has found? And then Wright goes against pretty much everybody in saying, have we found Abraham to be our forefather according to the flesh? Everybody else has said, what did Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, find? But the fact is, we can translate every single word there. The issue is what the emphasis falls upon. And I think the rest of the text will answer that question. But that's not the normal situation. The Greek language is considerably more accurate and expressive than the English language is. So your radical skepticism only comes from your ignorance, sir. And I don't know why you keep saying in our Twitter dialogue that when I say you're ignorant, I'm insulting you and calling you names. If you don't know the subject, don't publish a national magazine article on it. Someone might say you're ignorant. If I publish an article on accounting in a national accounting magazine, when people say, wow, you're ignorant, that will not be an insult. That'll be a fact. And in adult scholarship, and you're the ones you're claiming right there to be doing scholarship. When you demonstrate you don't know what you're talking about, that's called ignorance. That's not name calling, sir. I've never called you a name. Nature is God. This is also 175 to 200, P66. Here's P75, same phraseology used there at John 1:1. Here's P46, which I have seen in Dublin, Ireland, in the Chester Beatty Library. This is the beginning of Philippians right here. And I have seen the very page that has the Carmen Christi on it, also 175 to 200. There you've got the deity of Christ right there in the Greek manuscript, sir. Right there. Matthew 28 is right there. The script, John 17 is right there. John 20:28 is right there. It's in the Greek manuscript, sir. You are in error. And you call this a deception, leading to the story of mass killing. As a theologian, as one who studied textual criticism, and as one who's taught church history, your assertions are childish and absurd. Childish and absurd. It is unfair, it is biased for you to put this kind of material before the public. It's reckless. absolutely reckless to make this kind of accusation. Absolutely reckless. We are tired of it. We forgive you for it. And we would like you to come to know the truth about what the New Testament says. But we will respond to your accusations. And we will correct your accusations. Now, I forgot when we got things started, mainly because I was so looking forward to having a little co-host with me there for a few moments. There's the phones. Oh, look at that. She left her water here. Is that you're the mirror image of the people you detest. You say they haven't looked at these things. Neither have you. Neither of you. My students in Kiev are beating their heads against the table right now because despite the power outages in Kiev while I was there, we spent a lot of time on this one. Mr. Eichenwald, you seem to have missed the fact that what Paul's doing in that text is he's drawing directly from the Shema of Deuteronomy 6:4. Do you know what the Shema is, sir? Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Hear Israel, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh is one. And in Greek, that's kurios, hais, theos, kurios, one God, hais, theos, and he's talking about the fact there that he is one Lord. He uses kurios and theos, he breaks them up, and he uses, this is the expansion of the Shema in light of the incarnation, so that you have God the Father being identified as theos, Elohim. The Son is identified as kurios, which is Yahweh. And then the Father, for whom are all...
So you can get the link on the Reformed Baptist Daily, and there's the head, and there are two videos by James White there, which are pretty good videos, refuting what he's saying there, refuting Kurt's article. I've read the article, and I completely agree with James White that, considering it was in a magazine that has national influence, it was a magazine, it was an article that didn't have any scholarship whatsoever, and anybody who had more professional training in textual criticism would be able to deal and clearly call that article out. And James White has training in textual criticism and obviously can point out the mistakes and the errors. So if you want to go in detail on this, you've got the links, you've got the article, you've got the videos. So I'll leave you with it. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.